Welcome, everyone. And we're doing Jonathan Livingston Seagull, part 3. It's excellent. It's excellent. We'll unmute ourselves at the end, and then I guess I'll hear what you guys think about part 3. But this is the part where I feel like so many of us are actually there. Because part 1, and I know a lot of people in our Sangha, part 1 is discovering and really knowing that you can transform yourself, that there's transformation, speed. That's what we're talking about. Flight is finding the truth, and through flying, they're finding the truth of self and your authentic self. And then speed, you're learning to transform. And that was part 1. And then part 2, he ended up having to a higher level of consciousness. And he ended up really then learning and going to school and finding out what the inner truth was and realizing it has everything to do with what you're thinking about. It's not the act of flying itself. That's doing. It's the act of being. But we need to practice in the act of doing to waken up ourselves in the act of being. So through flight and through having this transformation, he was able to go to a higher level of consciousness and then realize that his true inner power was always inside himself. So that's number 2. Now, we've discussed that in a lot of books and groups that I've had before, and that's kind of where we're at. Now, part 3, wow. Part 3 is where we are, at least I believe, to come into the world. And the world needs part 3. This is what the world needs right now, is the people to understand that they have the inner power. That's part 2. But then to return and help, be part of the solution. Here it is. All right, try me on speaker view. Let's see how that goes. Be part of the solution instead of the problem, to take the lessons that we have learned, really have learned, and to bring them back to the others. So he decided, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, to go back. And when he went back, he met his first disciple, and his first disciple was Fletcher. So in the very first page, it sets up. So he's now come back, and it says Fletcher is, Jonathan Livingston Seagull is teaching Fletcher how to, let's get everyone a minute. Excellent, excellent. Just give it a second. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. So we've started, and we're talking about part 3, and then we'll collect back. Hi, Nancy. It's nice to see you. We'll collect back and then have your opinions at the end. Is that good? So I'm going to mute you all if you don't mind. And it's on speaker mode right now. So do you see me as a big person? Yes? Okay, good. Nancy, you're my big person. I don't know why when I see you. It's a good thing to see you. Okay, so here we go. Mute you all. All right. So part 3, in the very beginning, he's now gone back. And as I was just saying, it's just so important that part 3 is where we're at, where we have realized that is what we think is what we bring about, and that we get to transcend and really teach from our heart. Instead of doing, we get to be. So Jonathan is in the being mode, and he comes back to the doing realm, the level of consciousness on earth. And he meets Fletcher, and Fletcher is learning to fly. And Fletcher says on the very first page, "You're wasting your time with me, Jonathan. I'm too dumb. I'm too stupid. I try and I try, but I'll never get it." It's such an important thing, because isn't that quite often the inner dialogue that we all have in our own mind? I'm not going to get this. Nothing is going to change. The world's always going to be this way. I'm too dumb. I'm too weak. I can't make a difference. It's that inner lower thought of our lower level primitive thinking. And that's what Fletcher is representing in the very beginning. So Jonathan is representing the higher level of consciousness, and Fletcher's relating to the very primitive level of consciousness, really back into what we were as part 1. He's at the part 1. He's just waking up. He knows something's there, but he doesn't know what it is and he doesn't know how to get there. So Jonathan then goes on, and if you turn, he's like, and Fletcher is saying, remember, he's saying the word trying. And if you guys remember, we want to be always practicing, because trying makes it sound like you do something and then you fail. Practice is like, hey, not doing it well or failing for that day doesn't matter because you'll do it again tomorrow. So Fletcher at the lower consciousness is using trying. Jonathan at the higher consciousness, and later in this, Fletcher will cut to changes that vocabulary to practicing. By the end of 3 months, Jonathan had 6 students, outcasts all, yet curious about this strange new idea of flight for joy and flying. Reason why I want to read that is the word curious. Curiosity is the ticket to change. Not fear, not righteousness, nothing like that. It's curiosity, meaning I don't know. The beginning mind. Teach me. Let me learn. That's a beginning mind statement, curiosity. So we always want to have curiosity. It's how we end up learning new things and not judging things as right or wrong, but as a practice. Still, it was easier for them to practice high performance than it was to understand the reason behind it. Now that's interesting. I'd like that same. Once again, when you start beginning the pathway of waking up, you have to do the doing. It's you don't really get it, but you meditate. You're not sure why. Everyone just tells you, I promise you, if you meditate, you're going to feel better about yourself. Your mind will grow. You'll be able to have more focus. But they don't have the results yet. So ultimately, you have to do the exercise. You have to do the practice, this is where I like to use the word faith. Having the faith that when you do practice, that there will be an outcome. But in the beginning, it has to be the leap of faith, the first step, because the result isn't right there. It takes time. Each of us is in truth an idea of the great Gaul, an unlimited idea of freedom, Jonathan would say in the evenings on the bench. And precious flying is the step towards expression, our real nature. Everything that limits us, we have to put aside. That's why all of the high-speed practices and low-speed practices and acrobats and his students would be asleep, exhausted. So he was actually leading them right to the water. He was explaining why you're doing it. But this is written here saying, if you're not ready to get it, you won't. Even those with the best intentions, it takes time. It takes patience. It takes practice. It takes perseverance. So even they would fall asleep, those who want to know, because they couldn't register. They had only been practicing for 3 months. Goes on to the next page. And this is what Jonathan would say other times. And this is the truth that he's bringing back to from the higher consciousness to the lower consciousness. Is nothing more than your thought itself in a form you can see. Break the chains of your thought and break the chains of your body too. But no matter how he said it, it sounded like pleasant fiction, and they needed more sleep, meaning that they weren't ready to wake up to the knowledge that he was feeding them. He was bringing it back. How many people have given us the truth and we could not take it? It sounds like, yeah. Well, Jesus did that. Buddha did that. My grandma did that. The Dalai Lama did, but not me. So that's where they're at. But the truth is the truth for everyone. And this is why Jonathan was saying it. It's the truth for him. And this is ultimately what they'll get. And they would say, we're not ready, said Henry Calvin Gall. This is when Jonathan said, okay, we're going to go back to the flock, because he felt like it was time to expose them. And then Henry said, we're not ready. We're not welcome. We're outcasts. We can't force ourselves to go where we're not welcome. And Jonathan said, we're free to go where we wish and to be what we are. This is so important. So once again, the lower realms, they run into fear. So they have some training. But don't we all feel that way sometimes? We're like, well, I practice loving kindness. I practice higher consciousness. I got it. But can I do anything with it? Our fear creeps up inside of ourselves. And this is the lower, it's this a part of waking up is that you get the tools, but then you think, are they going to work? I have the fear. And he kept saying, you're limiting yourself by this fear. You are what you believe you are. So let's go and believe beyond that fear. And so he takes them. And he takes them to the flock, and he starts then flying around with them and teach them. So they don't run over to the flock and start screaming in their face, you need to know this. You need to know this. That's so important for you to understand, because we cannot go up to people and just yell at them or force them to understand our point of view. They won't take it in. They get defensive. They'll feel like they're being attacked, right? So Jonathan doesn't try to do that. A higher level of consciousness is not going to be forcing a lower level of consciousness to understand. They lead by example. So that's what Jonathan did. He went and he showed how it was safe by teaching his 6 disciples, flying in front of the other ones. And then what did that do? Instead of sparking defensiveness, right? And that's what happens when you start preaching to someone, they get defensive. Instead of sparking defensiveness, they got curious. And they started to come and start around and hang around them at night, right? And we know what happens at night. At night is when people feel that they're not seen. So it's kind of like they're in the mask and they won't be identified. And this is why we have so much chaos at night and not during the day, because they feel that they have when we get off mute, you'll get that word. Anonymity. Anyway, they can't be seen. You know what I'm trying to say. Same thing. This is what they're saying in here. They came at night. They got curious where they felt safe and they wouldn't become outcasts. So I just want to say one line on this that made me very interesting to me. It says, one of the seagulls said to the other people, okay, if you do that, I'm not saying exactly what they said, but you're going to be an outcast. And then the one seagull goes with, hey, man, where did they learn to fly like that? I just like that because it was written in the 70s. We don't say that anymore. Hey, man, where did they learn to fly like that? It just, there's so little of the culture, of the vocabulary of the culture of the time, but it's right there. Now, this is something I also thought was very important. At the very bottom, it says, the Gauls who speak to an outcast is himself an outcast. The Gauls who looks upon an outcast breaks the law of the flock. That keeps everyone in line. And I want you to know, I was talking to my dad yesterday, and he has worked with the police a lot in the past about a product, about this net that catches people without harming them. And the one thing he realized that there are so many, when he did this, so many awesome police officers that he worked with. They were just so caring and loving and really wanted to help people and wanted to use this net instead of violence and so forth. But there was this little rule of thumb that police officers don't turn in police officers. And my dad, when he was talking to me, he said, I guess it's kind of like maybe, Lindsay, teachers don't turn in teachers. And I think we have this kind of feeling of being part of a group, and that it's better to be quiet and stay part of the group than to speak up and then be outcasted by the group. And that's really what he's saying right here in Jonathan Livingston Seagull. He's saying, the group is saying, if you speak to an outcaster, you're going to become an outcaster. It's the same concept. This is very primitive thinking in our system, that if you're part of a village, that you have to show all your loyalty to the village, even when the village does things wrong. In a higher level of thinking, of consciousness, you can be part of the village and you don't have to agree with the village. because there's open communication and the village itself will be wanting to grow. But at lower level, a village wants to stay permanent. And if anything is threatening it, then it shuts itself down. And that's where I believe the United States is that we're learning how to break out of that primitive village collective thinking into that the village is meant to have curiosity and grow and to change, and that you can be part of the village and speak against the village. That's very powerful, higher level of thinking. Anyway, it's interesting we're reading this section right at this time in our life. All right, so basically one of the other seagulls broke away and joined the group. And that seemed, people were like, wow. And then what really happened was one of the seagulls that was hurt and had a broken wing, he came to Jonathan and he said, I would like to fly. And he said, okay. And he said, but I have a broken wing. And he said, but if that limits you, then you're not flying. But if you can see beyond that, you will fly. And so he said, Maynard Gull, you have the freedom to be yourself, your true self, here and now, and nothing can stand in your way. It is the law of the great Gull. It's the law that is. Are you saying I can fly? And he says, I say that you are free. This is the consciousness that we are now, I believe, changing into, that the freedom, my skin color, or being whatever my sexuality is, or being a woman, or being young, or being old, those are all limited beliefs that we hold that chain us. But we are all free to fly. And we have to break those chains and break that limited belief system that somehow our age or our color of our skin or sexuality holds us down, or our disabilities, whatever it is. Those are belief systems that we then inflict on other people and we inflict on ourselves. But he's saying, no, we've got to drop that. I say you are free. And so when he starts believing in his own freedom, then his wing is not broken anymore. He can fly. And that freaks everybody out because, see, the handicap that he had a broken wing was obvious to everyone. And so they had the same belief system. When he broke his belief system that he could fly no matter what his body was, even if he had this handicap, and other people saw it, that jarred them to be like, wow, maybe for real, there's something about this. And that's what sometimes has to happen. I hate to say, but in lower consciousness, sometimes we have to be jarred awake. And we have to realize, no, that handicap has not limited me. That's one reason why I don't like to live in claiming that I'm dyslexic as an excuse, but I like to tell people I'm dyslexic and then tell people what I've done, not because I'm trying to glorify myself, but to show people that being dyslexic is only a handicap in my own mind or in their mind if I believe it, and I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I remember one time when I was younger, I was in my 20s, and this person came up to me, and I'm 6 feet tall, and this person came up to me and said, you must really have a hard time getting a boyfriend, because I was so tall. Now that did not even dawn on me as being a truth, that my height would limit my dating prospects at all. I never thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to walk into a bar or a club or whatever, and people are going to see me and think, oh, ew, get away, she's 6 feet tall. But it said so much about the person who was talking to me. It showed how my physicalness triggered something in her. If she's ranking me that way, she's actually ranking herself that way all the time. That was a belief system she had. And I want you to know, I never had a problem getting a date, not because of my height. Dating was not an issue. Okay, so this, on the next page, I think this is really important part, because this is where we're at. We're talking really deep when it comes to Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And some people might be saying, Lindsay, you're talking crazy stuff. I think you're reading too much into it. Maybe I am. But the bottom line is that people can only hear what they're ready to hear. And that's really reinforced in this level of him coming from higher consciousness to go and teach in lower consciousness. So in this page, on my book, it's 81, he says, he spoke of very simple things. That is, the right for a gull to fly, that freedom is the true nature of his being, that whatever stands against that freedom must be set aside, be it ritual, superstition, or limitations in any form. That is so huge. He kept it simple, kept it simple. And that's why when you teach people, you've got to think of a teacher. You can't use your vocabulary, you have to use their vocabulary. You can't use your learning style, you have to use their learning style, because it's them who are learning. So you have to make sure you're speaking of it from that level. And it says, whatever stands against the freedom must be set aside, meaning the belief systems. If you're not achieving inner peace, let me just say this again, if you're not achieving inner peace, there's something within your belief system that's stopping it. The world will always have its chaotic to it, always. There's always going to be pain and suffering going on. But if you cannot find inner peace in the chaos, then there's a belief system that's attaching that the chaos or the suffering is maybe something that you feel has to be there. So in the old days, if you remember, a lot of times in some religions, people would whip themselves, or starve themselves to find God. Where is it written for that? That is like superstition. That is their belief system. And once it's their belief system, it had to be true. But many people have found God in the middle path, meaning not starving themselves, not overeating. Keep it simple. If you're making it complicated, then it's because of a belief system. At the bottom, it says, look at Fletcher. Let's see, let me get here. Okay, so Fletcher's like doing all this great stuff, and so are these other ones. It says, they are all also special and gifted and divine, no more than you are, no more than I am. The only difference, the very only one, is that they have begun to understand what they really are and have begun to practice it. So what's happened is these gulls have come in and they said, but you guys are special. And this is what the Buddha said. He said, I am a man. I am not special. I am a man who's done the practice and continues doing the practice. And this is exactly what they are saying right here. What Jonathan is saying right here is they're no different than you. They've just done the work. And they've let go of the belief systems that stop them. Wow. Okay, so then it goes on to the next thing, and they say that the flock, that they're thinking that Jonathan is like this incredible God or devil for what's going on. So he says, Jonathan sighed, the price of being misunderstood, he thought. They call you the devil or they call you God. What do you think, Fletcher? Are we ahead of our times? A long silence. Well, this kind of flying has always been here, to be learned by anybody who wanted to discover it. That's got nothing to do with time. We're ahead of our fashion, maybe, ahead of the way that most gulls fly. Now that is what I'm talking about. There's always going to be pioneers of consciousness. But consciousness and the ability to be conscious and to live a peaceful life and to know the world that we're all interconnected has been here from the beginning of time. It's the evolution of waking up. It's not the evolution of consciousness. Consciousness is there always. So the Buddha was teaching people, or Jesus was teaching the disciples thousands and thousands of years ago, the exact same stuff. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, but it might not be what we're doing in this world at this time, but it doesn't mean consciousness itself wasn't here. So it's the evolution. So our culture could be waking up. And that's what I'm hoping, that the United States and the world culture of interconnectedness is waking up. But the ability to have a higher level of consciousness is timeless. Does that make sense? Okay. So then Fletcher is going ahead, and he was flying, and he didn't want to run into a youngster, and he flew right into a cliff. Okay. And Jonathan went over to him and started to speak to him. And he actually said, Fletcher, you have to be a little more patient, which I thought was patiently. You have to learn in order, which I thought was interesting, because I always talk about being patient and persevering in practice. And Jonathan says, let's see, Fletcher's saying, what's going on? And this is what Jonathan said. Oh, Fletcher, come on, think. If you're talking to me now, he said, am I dead? And he said, oh, Fletcher, come on, think. If you're talking to me now, then obviously you didn't die, did you? What you did manage to do was to change the level of consciousness rather abruptly. It's your choice now. You can stay here and learn on this level, which is quite a bit higher than the one you had left, by the way, or you can go back and keep working with the flock. The elders were hoping for some kind of disaster, but they're startled that you obliged them so well. Okay. The bottom line is Fletcher is having a near-death experience. I want you to understand, we've heard about this in so many, when people say they die and then like someone comes and says, do you want to come and cross over to the light, or do you want to go back? What do you want to do? You have a choice. At least this is what I've read. I haven't had a near-death experience, but this is what I read. So this is what he has put in the book, and he's now having the choice. The important part that I see in this is that death is not nothingness. Death is then where the soul or the energy transforms to a higher plane. And that's what I'm saying. Are you going to go to the higher plane and drop your body? Or are you going to go to the lower plane and go back into your body? And he's given the choice. And so Fletcher chooses to go back into the body. And when he does that, then he wakes up. And so then everyone around him and all the elders, they're really spooked out, right? Because he looks like he's dead. So then Fletcher's like, Jonathan, we got to get out of here because these guys are going to attack us. That's very much like similar to the resurrection of Jesus, and how when Jesus came back, everyone was really spooked and they didn't believe it. So it has a lot of symbology on that the higher plane has returned back to the lower plane to teach. And so the people are then saying, well, now is he the devil? Kind of thing like that. The big part about this is that when you go and Jonathan is talking to Fletcher, he goes, we have to keep loving them. And Fletcher says, I don't understand how you managed to love a mob of birds that have just tried to kill you. How about if I just change this to, I don't understand how you managed to love a mob that just went and rioted and burned down your city. Same, right? Oh, Fletcher, you don't love that. You don't love the hatred and evil, of course. You have to practice and see the real goal, the good in every one of them, and to help them see it in themselves. back into the compassion. This is what he's saying. That's what I mean by love. It's fun when you get the knack of it. And it sure is. It sure is fun when you are able to help someone who's in pain and their pain doesn't trigger your fear, that you can stay in love. You do not condone negative behavior. I'm not saying that. You do not reinforce negative behavior, but you do not have to become negative behavior. We've all had incredible amounts of pain in our life where we felt hatred, loneliness, trapped, all that. So we have compassion, we understand, but we've also transcended that and been able to open our heart and feel love. So if we can, instead of judging others, he's saying, you don't condone them, but don't judge them. Don't put them on the defensive. Teach them. Listen. Listen to the pain and then guide them without making them defensive. So powerful. I just listened to a really good talk last night by Jack Kornfield, who's a terrific Buddhist teacher, and that's what he was saying. It's like, you do not condone what's going on, but you take love in action. You do have to act, but you take love in action. You don't take pain in action. You don't take hatred in action. You take love in action. And if you can do that, if you can go to the higher plane and meet people and help them, things will change. Wow. So incredible, because that's what's happening in this chapter. I can't believe everything is synchronized, right? Chapter 3, coming back, dealing with people who are dealing with the flock that's in pain and misguided and upset and believing in superstition and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, the higher conscious come back and they show love in action. In my opinion, protesting or marching in a healthy way is love in action. If you can do it, that's great. Love in action. Rioting is not. That's hatred. That's pain. Okay. So he goes on and he says, and here he is today building his own heaven instead and leading the whole flock in that direction. So what they're talking about here is Fletcher. Fletcher is taken on and has become the teacher. And he is realizing that it's so important. Heaven, he's building his own heaven. You remember back in part 2, Jonathan woke up into the higher plane and he said, is this heaven? And the answer was no. It was just the next level of consciousness. Heaven is something you build. It's inside yourself. It's awakening yourself. A little bit further down, and when Jonathan says that he's leaving, he says, and Fletcher doesn't want him to go. He says, you don't need me any longer. You need to keep finding yourself a little more each day. That real unlimited Fletcher Seagull. He's your instructor. You need to understand him and to practice him. That's so important. And Jonathan Livingston Seagull, he's saying, don't follow the teacher, you become the teacher. It's you, your Buddha nature, your Christ consciousness, your Elizabeth, your Barbara, your Lori, your Nancy, your Lindsay. That is your teacher, but the higher level one, not the one from fear, not the one from pain, but from love in action. What would love do in action? That's what Jack Kornfield said last night. He just kept saying over and again, said, ask what love in action would do. When you get stuck and we don't know what to do, he goes, I don't have the answer for you. It was really wonderful. He's like, so of course he's really calm. So he goes like this, I don't have the answer for you. Love in your own action. Okay, so I'm not like him. Love in your action. And then when Jonathan was leaving, his last things he was saying, don't let them spread silly rumors about me or make me a god. That's what the Buddha said too. make sure that we stay and realize that every human being or every Gaul has the chance to build heaven. You don't have to find someone else's way. You have to find your own way with love and action. You've got to understand that seagulls is an unlimited idea. Okay, so now this is what Fletcher, and this is the last page of part 3, is saying to his now new people, or his new seagulls. Okay, to begin with, he said heavenly, you've got to understand that seagulls is unlimited idea of freedom, an image of the great Gaul, and your whole body, from wingtip to wingtip, is nothing more than your thought itself. This is exactly how Jonathan started to teach Fletcher. Now Fletcher's him. It's all about your thought yourself. Then what did they do? They didn't get it. So it goes on, and he says, the young Gauls looked at him quizzically. Hey man, they thought, that doesn't sound like the rule for a loop. Fletcher sighed and started it over. Very well, he said, and eyed them critically. Let's begin with the level flight. So once again, you have to start where they're at. He had to start with the doing, with the meditation. I'm just bringing it in our realms, the meditation, the act of random acts of kindness, right reading, the doing, to bring ourselves into the being. So he's like, and it's all about thought. And they were like, we don't understand. Okay, let's start over. We all got to start again. So the very last paragraph I'll read. And though he tried to look properly severe for the students, Fletcher Gull suddenly saw them all as they really were, just for that moment. And he more than he loved them for what he saw. No limits, Jonathan, he thought, and he smiled. His race to learn had begun. All right, what's important about that is that his new group, they seemed broken. But he was able to see past that and see that they all have Christ consciousness or the Buddha nature, or they all have divinity. It just hasn't woken up yet in them. And he saw that. And that's when he felt interconnected, even with the ignorant. That is the highest level of consciousness, is when we can feel their interconnection, even with those who are spewing pain, because we know that inside of them, they are like ourselves, and they all have the possibility of waking up, but it takes practice, right? It takes practice. So Fletcher continues on, and then we get to go to chapter 4, part 4. So I'm going to swing us back to our group, and I'm going to unmute you all. But just know, I'll unmute you all. And then I would love someone else to tell me what they liked about this chapter 3. Didn't it seem very prevalent to what's going on in our world of lower consciousness and people trying to rise in their consciousness, and it's all happening at the exact same time, which is very confusing. What do you think, Nancy? Oh, I can't hear you. See, for some reason I can't hear you. Unmute all, mute all, unmute all. Can you hear me?
Here. Okay.
Oh, now I can hear you. There you go. Okay.
So, yeah, I think it's totally prevalent for today's world. But I just like the whole thing at the end, because for me, the book ends here. I don't have a chapter 4.
Okay, good.
This is like
the original.
Yeah, from 1976.
Okay, so let me tell you, he wrote chapter 4 and he put it away and he didn't put it in. And then in 2013, he found it again. He found his part 4 and he published it. So you can get on the internet and write part
Yeah.
4 and you
Okay.
can download it.
Okay.
Just the
Definitely. Yeah. So, yeah, I like that part. I like how chapter 3 ends with like no limits. But you know what's interesting is the fact that Fletcher decided to stay where he was instead of moving on, and he doesn't make it seem as if he's not growing. Jonathan, you know what I mean? Because like people are like, oh, if you're going to stay here, then you didn't really grow. But the book doesn't, Richard Bach didn't perceive it, or, you know, doesn't perceive it that way, that you're not moving on. I kind of like that.
I love that. And that's the definition of a bodhisattva.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. That we can grow wherever we're at, no matter where we're at. You don't have to go to the next plane to grow. So, but you can teach. Can you grow when you teach? I think Lori said that she learned the most about piano when she was teaching a person who had dyslexia, right? Didn't you say that last time? What did you think of part 3, Lori? Oh, you're muted too. See, still, oh wait, now talk. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like this chapter. And it's funny because I used the highlighter and it seemed like I highlighted all of the things that you read.
Good.
Yeah. Good. I especially like page 81.
What part of it?
Well, that it is right for a gull to fly, that freedom is the very nature of his being, that whatever stands against that freedom must be set aside, be it ritual or superstition or limitation in any form. I really like that. That seems to pertain to today's mess.
Yeah, it does. You know, I was actually thinking of putting that quote, you know, like sometimes on Facebook put up quotes. I think I'm going to make that quote and just, you know, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, because that's exactly what we're at right now. We need to change our belief system. People want to change a law. It's not a law that needs to change. It's a belief system that needs to change. You know, we can regulate as much as we want. We can tell the cops not to do this or do that, but they're just a reflection of a belief system. You know, I read some lady, she was saying, she was interviewed. She was a woman. She said, she was African-American, and she said, my son is 6 feet tall. I don't want him to walk into a store and people be fearful of him because of that. That's a belief system. That has nothing to do with the cops. That's everyone cheering around going, that's something that we have inside our own mind. So hopefully through people like dialogue, like she's saying, and her speaking out and making that and me reading that, it wakes me up. That's what I think is so cool. You know, we all need to lean into our own sharp points and shift. And not just about, like I said, African American, about women. People, the belief system that someone's old is like, should be put away, you know, or someone who has a disability is now broken. Those belief systems need to be shattered. Let's see, Barbara, do you want to say anything? Or Karen, Elizabeth?
No, it was interesting. I just, it's going to take a while to figure out how this is, what we're supposed to do with action, with love, but it's something to ponder on.
Yes. So in our own life, I agree with you. And let me tell you right now, what we do today might be very different than what we do tomorrow. So Jack Cornfield last night, he said, he goes, if I wasn't 75 years old and the virus wasn't going around, I would be doing something different. But this is what I need to do now. So there is something, you know, marching might not be what we do today, especially if we're taking care of older people or we have people so forth, because this virus could kill some people and it could kill my mother-in-law, and I help take care of my mother-in-law and things like that. So that might not be my action today, but it could be my action in the future. You know, my action today might be just sending out an email or just staying positive and not feeding in to the negativity. Yesterday I was on a dog walk, and somebody came along and started to tell me that the National Guard and was out in Thousand Oaks and all this stuff, and I knew what they were saying was not true. And I said, no, I don't think so. I mean, I read what was going on. I kept my ear to it. And they're like, I go, how do you know this? Because I didn't want to say that she was lying to me. And she said, well, my friend saw it. And so, of course, I just said, you know, I'll look into it, but maybe we should read up on it. Well, her friend saw some cops and misunderstood who they are. You know what I mean? And the story just exasperates. But I was not going to feed into the fear with her. I just said, I don't think so, but why don't we check when we get home? We'll both Google it. And I just left it. So I left it open that maybe it isn't as bad as she thought. So hopefully she went home and Googled it. And I did go home and Google it just to make sure I was correct too. But I didn't want to buy in. We just cannot buy in and feed the fuel of pain. Another thing we can do, and it's so important, is listen. It's really, right now, there's so much tension. We need to listen. If someone needs to spew and say something, I need to just listen and let them get it out. We know. And maybe that's what I am right now. I'm an open heart with two big ears saying I care, and that's it. And I don't have an answer. I do not have an answer, but I do know that we can collectively change with time. It's not going to happen overnight. There's not going to be one little thing that happens, but this is such an evolutionarily changing time right now. And I've seen some amazing positive things. There's another thing Jack said. He goes, when you watch the news, they politicize the negativity and they feed your fear. He goes, but there are billions of kind things happening all the time, every day. People opening up doors, people sharing, people grocery shopping for each other, mothers, you know, kissing their kids who have fallen down, teaching someone to ride a bike, picking up medication for somebody else. They're not on the news, but know that there's a billion kind things happening all the day. Look at those billion things. Don't look at the 3, 4, 5 things. You can listen to the pain, that's fine. But there's so much love going on, so many dedicated people who care. Make sure that you put your ears and your eyes to what is good, and don't get lost into the media that's trying to get you to watch it for ratings, right?
Yeah, you know, Lindsay, my favorite person that I heard of in the news today was the sheriff of Flint, Michigan, who marched along the protesters.
There you go. There you go. And I marched, you know, they're marchers. It's a beautiful thing. I saw one of them, I think I told you guys, or in one of my groups, one of the scariest, well, not scary, is when I saw people who were protesting about not wearing a mask. I said, you know who they look like? They look like me. That really bummed me out, that there was all these people out protesting not to wear a mask and they look just like me. And now I saw these women who look like me. They were all, you know, I don't know, 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe some 70s, but maybe 40s and 50s. They were Caucasian like me, and a lot of them had blonde hair like me, and they were linked arms. And they all were saying, we're moms protecting. And they were protecting the African-American protesters between them. They put this line between them and the cops. I don't think the cops were going to do anything, in my opinion. But the bottom line is they were representing what they were representing of support. They're saying, and that, now I'm proud. I'm like, yay, there are people like me. So this is good. This is good. So, like Elizabeth said, I'm not quite sure what call of action to do is for love in action. Love in action right now is just to listen and keep promoting the higher consciousness, knowing that there isn't a quick answer. And then, of course, love in action will be to vote. Love in action will not to be led in fear. So those are all love in action that we can do now. Continually reading things like this that keep us shifted in the right direction, you know, the right mode. And another thing Jack said last night is make sure you're hanging out with your Sangha. And he was talking about his group. You know, we were all on this. It was like 1,000 people watching. But this is our Sangha. We're not alone in this. And it's nice to know we're together. And some of us I know are going to be watching this on tape. But we missed them today and we look forward to them next week. Right? We are the Sangha. And collectively, our synergy will do more good together.
Thank you, Lindsay, for helping us get through this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being part of Sangha together. So I want to say to everyone, namaste. I'll see you
Namaste.
next week. And some of you guys I'll see tomorrow on the Wednesday Better with Aging class. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.